I move the motion. Minister, the reality is that planning for the return of schools was made more difficult because we have an education system that is grossly underfunded and understaffed. 1 in every 5 children, 1 in every 4 in your constituency of Kerry, are in classes of over 30. Many are in classes much larger than that. There are not enough teachers and there is not enough space. That has made trying to achieve social distancing and a safe return much harder than it is in other jurisdictions. For example, in Denmark, they've been able to split class into groups of 10, and in France, to have classes capped at 15. There is no doubt but that children need to be back in school. All parents and staff worked hard over the last few months trying to keep things on the road between projects and art and essays and baking and class Zooms and exercise with Joe Wicks and all the rest of it. And people made an enormous effort, there's no doubt about that. But we all know that it is not the ideal way to get an education. And despite everyone's best efforts, but there's no question that a lot of children fell behind. So we've been calling for months for a roadmap for education that was significantly funded, that had the package that was required. Now, I'm glad that the government has finally responded to the pressure coming from the opposition and indeed from parents and the public as a whole, and finally released the plan yesterday evening. I am concerned, however, that the roadmap fails to deliver on crucial areas and leaves parents and teachers with an incredibly short time frame to bring these plans to fruition. The new school year is to start in just over 4 weeks. That is just 4 weeks for schools to plan, to recruit staff, to adjust classrooms, and indeed in some instances to build or find additional space. We were given the roadmap, and it contains diagrams, and it contains classrooms of 60 metres and 80 metres at primary school. But, Minister, you know and I know that there are many primary schools. You can think of Christian Brothers primary schools that might have been built in the 50s or 60s, where the classrooms are much smaller than that. And they might be in areas of high population, and they're now going to have to struggle to find whether they're converting corridors or halls or anything at all. And that is going to be a real challenge for them. Its implementation would clearly have been a lot more realistic if it had been published on the 12th of June as was promised, or even a fortnight after that as was subsequently promised. I'm quite concerned as well about the substitution. I think a lot of concern has been raised around this across the state. Last year, 500 substitutes a day, or there was 500 posts a day which were not being replaced. Now, there's 200 additional substitutes. I don't think that was enough to match what was required last year, much less this year in the context of COVID-19. The roadmap, while welcome, is not a sticking plaster for the fact that we have the highest pupil-teacher ratio in the EU. And I note the Minister's amendment, and it's the government giving themselves a great big clap on the back, but it doesn't actually address the fundamental point here, which I think is disappointing, especially given that it's actually meant to be a programme for government commitment to reducing the pupil-teacher ratio, to investing in schools, and that's not even commented on, which to me draws into question whether this is a government that's truly committed to transforming the education system that's needed. While no one could have predicted the scale and manner of the pandemic, we have to acknowledge that the failure to invest in our schools has put them in a particularly vulnerable position, which meant that ever before COVID, they were stretched to breaking point. Minister, I believe that you need to take this on, and it needs to be an absolute priority. We have left our school system so vulnerable, but it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, tackling the pupil-teacher ratio at primary level in the first instance can be cost neutral over the coming years because of the demographic shift. All you need to do, Minister, is to hold firm against anyone in your department that wants to reduce the workforce in the department. If you hold on to teachers at primary level, you can reduce the pupil-teacher ratio at no additional cost. I think it's incredible that in the midst of a pandemic, where social distancing is such a crucial issue, but also the impact it has had on education, that there is no commitment within the plan to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio, to reduce the overcrowded classes. I think that's really disappointing. I think that it was absolutely necessary to begin that process of tackling the oversized classes because it has enormous impact on education. The other concern I want to raise is children with special educational needs. And there is a question arising today, and has arisen since yesterday, and brought into further repair by the circular which was supplied today, which seems to suggest that special education teachers can be moved to cover absences and work on remote teaching. I'll return to this in my rapid speech. But, Minister, Children with special educational needs are among those who have lost out most in the last few months. They need to be the priority, not to be undermined by their resources being allocated elsewhere.